Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, A Disturbance on the Road. The evening lay heavy with mist, a pale curtain that softened the hedgerows and blurred the outlines of the Kentish countryside. The motor car, a modest yet serviceable model belonging to Captain Hastings, rattled along the winding lane with a rhythm that seemed oddly soothing in the stillness. Hercule Poirot, compact and faultlessly attired despite the rustic journey, sat beside his friend with his hands folded neatly upon his lap. His moustaches, those luxuriant symbols of his vanity, were as glossy and precise as ever, despite the damp air pressing against the glass. "You know, Poirot," said Hastings cheerfully, adjusting the wheel as the car rounded a bend, "there's nothing like the English countryside at dusk. The hedges, the fields, the smell of wood smoke, it does the heart good." Poirot inclined his head. "It is pretty, yes. But to me, mon ami, it lacks the geometry, the order. These hedges, they sprawl, they wander. The little roads twist and turn as though they have lost their way. It is, how do you English say it, charming, but without system." Hastings laughed. "You'll never change, old fellow. Order and neatness above all, eh?" "Exactment," Poirot agreed gravely, though his eyes twinkled. The car crested a rise, and the road dipped steeply before them. At the bottom of the incline, Hastings slowed suddenly, frowning. A cluster of figures loomed through the mist, lanterns and torches flickering, voices raised in agitation. At the center stood a motor car, its bonnet tilted at an awkward angle, its driver's door swung wide. A crowd of villagers and passers-by pressed close, craning their necks. "Hello, something's amiss," Hastings muttered, braking and pulling the car to one side. "Looks like an accident." Poirot was already leaning forward, his keen eyes darting over the scene with the alertness of a bird of prey. "Non, Hastings. Regardes. Do you see how they cluster, not around the machine, but upon the ground? There, beside the wheel. It is not an accident, I think." The two men alighted. The chill damp clung to their coats as they approached. Hastings pushed gently through the crowd, announcing himself with the authority of a gentleman accustomed to order. Poirot followed, his head cocked slightly, absorbing every detail. On the ground, his limbs neatly arranged as though laid out by a careful hand, lay a man of middle years. His dark hair was silvered at the temples, his suit finely tailored, though disheveled now. His eyes were closed, his expression curiously calm for one so evidently dead. A coat, folded with almost absurd precision, rested beside him. The murmurs of the onlookers swelled as Hastings knelt. "Good heavens," he whispered. "He's gone." Poirot crouched, not touching, merely observing. His gaze traced the angle of the body, the position of the car door, the state of the shoes, polished to perfection despite the muddy verge. His nostrils flared delicately, as if scenting something in the air. "Does anyone know him?" Hastings asked the crowd. "I," replied a stocky man in shirt sleeves, wiping his brow. "That's Mr. Frobisher, sir. Banker from the town. I seen him drive this way not an hour ago." There was a murmur of recognition, mixed with unease. Poirot raised a finger, silencing them. He spoke softly, but his tone carried authority. "Messieurs, mesdames, pray do not disturb anything. Let us allow the facts to speak, yes." He bent lower, peering at the base of the victim's skull. A slight swelling, almost hidden by the hair, revealed itself to his sharp eyes. He nodded once, gravely. "This is no fainting fit, Hastings. Our poor monsieur has been struck, a sharp blow, delivered with precision." Hastings looked startled. "Murder, then?" Poirot's lips pursed. At the least, violence. And perhaps, yes, murder. The villagers muttered uneasily, drawing back. One woman crossed herself. A young lad gawked wide-eyed, until an older man cuffed him gently and ushered him away. Poirot rose, dusting his immaculate cuffs as though brushing off invisible particles. He studied the motorcar with the same clinical eye. Nothing was broken, the bonnet merely propped open. Inside the car, the seats were orderly, a walking stick propped against the dashboard. The only anomaly was a scattering of small droplets, ink, it seemed, on the passenger side floor mat. Hastings followed his gaze. Ink? Odd thing to carry in a motorcar. Poirot gave no reply, only hummed softly, a sound Hastings recognized as the prelude to serious thought. The village constable arrived then, puffing and red-faced, his notebook clutched in one hand. He seemed relieved to find order already imposed. Hastings explained briefly, and Poirot added, "See, Monsieur l'Agent, that nothing is moved. Every detail is important." The constable scratched his head. "A banker, you say?" "Well, if it's murder, there'll be plenty of folk with reason, I'd wager. Bankers aren't always beloved." Poirot regarded him with a faint smile. "True, monsieur. But not everyone who dislikes a man strikes him down upon the road." The constable blinked, uncertain how to reply. Hastings clapped him on the shoulder. "Better send word to the inspector in town. This will want proper handling." The crowd began to disperse, though reluctantly. Poirot remained still, his head tilted, as though listening for something beyond the chatter of voices. At last he spoke quietly to Hastings. "Tell me, mon ami, what strikes you most curious here?" Hastings glanced at the body, the folded coat, the polished shoes. "Curious? Well, that coat being folded is odd, I grant. And the shoes, not a speck of mud, though the ground is damp enough." Poirot's eyes glowed. "Just so. He lies by the roadside, yet his coat is folded as though prepared for travel, not torn off in struggle. His shoes are spotless, though the verge is mire. These are not the marks of chance or clumsiness. None, they are the signatures, subtle, deliberate, of an intelligent hand." He tapped his temple. "The murderer, Hastings, is one who takes care. Who values order. Who perhaps understands, as I do, the importance of detail." Hastings shivered slightly, not from the cold. "You mean, someone clever? Not a common thief?" Poirot lifted his eyes to the misty horizon, where the lane curved away into shadows. "Oh, mon ami. Someone clever. And that makes it, for us, most interesting. For when one mind seeks to conceal, another must unravel. The game, Hastings, is begun." Chapter 2, The Victim. The body of Mr. Henry Frobisher was conveyed with solemn efficiency to the small inn at the edge of the village, where the parlour was hastily converted into a makeshift chamber of inquiry. The mist outside pressed against the windows, and the air within grew thick with the mingled odour of lamp oil, damp clothing, and the faint sweetness of flowers from a vase that seemed hopelessly out of place beside a corpse. Hercule Poirot stood over the still form, his silhouette crisp against the lamplight. His hands were clasped behind his back, his head bent at an angle that suggested both reverence and relentless scrutiny. Captain Hastings lingered near the door, his military stance betraying a faint unease. "Frobisher, eh?" Hastings murmured, peering at the dead man's features. "I've heard the name somewhere. Banking, wasn't it?" The village constable, Constable Riggs, puffed himself up. "That's right, sir. Henry Frobisher, director of Graves and Frobisher, the firm in town. Lived at Ashcombe House, about 3 miles from here. Bit of a grand sort, but not what you'd call popular." Poirot's gaze never wavered from the body. Not popular, perhaps. But observe, Hastings, how he presents himself even in death, the suit of good quality, though not new, the hair carefully trimmed, the shoes polished to perfection. This is a man who valued appearance. Order, propriety. Hastings nodded thoughtfully. And yet here he lies, murdered on a country lane. Just so. Poirot crouched beside the corpse once more. His fingertip hovered over the swelling at the base of the skull, careful not to touch. The blow, precise, economical. It tells us something of the hand that delivered it. Not the brute strength of an unthinking ruffian, but the calculation of one who knew exactly where to strike. Riggs, who looked faintly queasy, scribbled in his notebook. "Doc'll be along shortly to confirm." "I'll mark your words, Mr. Poirot." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "Merci." At that moment the door opened, and a tall, angular man in spectacles entered. He introduced himself as Dr. Whitcomb, the village physician. After a brisk but respectful examination, he confirmed what Poirot had already discerned. "Instantaneous," he pronounced. The blow was delivered with considerable accuracy. Not many could strike so effectively without hesitation. "And the time of death?" Poirot asked. "Judging by the temperature and stiffness, perhaps an hour, no more. Between 6 and 7 o'clock this evening." Poirot's eyes flickered briefly toward Hastings, as though a clock had struck in his mind. "Merci, docteur. That is most helpful." The doctor departed, and the constable bustled off to send word to the county inspector. Hastings moved closer, lowering his voice. "What do you make of it, Poirot?" Poirot lifted a small notebook from the table where Frobisher's belongings had been arranged. A silver watch, a wallet thick with banknotes, a fountain pen, all untouched. "Consider, Hastings. Nothing is stolen. The motive is not robbery. The coat, folded so carefully, suggests deliberation." And yet, he bent suddenly, his sharp eyes catching a detail at the hem of the trousers. A faint smear, not of mud but of something darker. He leaned closer. Blood, perhaps, but not his own. A trace, too slight to be from the fatal blow. Curious. Hastings frowned. Could it belong to the murderer? Poirot's moustaches twitched. Perhaps, mon ami. A careless droplet from an earlier struggle, or a false trail, planted with cunning. He straightened, his expression unreadable. In either case, it is of great importance. By the following morning, the affair was the talk of the village. Rumors flew thick and fast, whispers of a jealous husband, of debts, of secrets hidden behind the banker's polished facade. Poirot, immune to gossip, spent the early hours examining the motorcar once more. The vehicle was a sleek touring model, dark blue, its paintwork immaculate. Poirot inspected the seats, the floor mats, the small compartment beneath the dashboard. He noted again the splatter of ink, dried now but unmistakable. From the glove compartment he withdrew a sheaf of papers, letters, neatly tied with ribbon, addressed to Frobisher in a feminine hand. Hastings, who had joined him, whistled. Letters from a lady. That does rather thicken the plot, eh? Poirot's eyes gleamed. It thickens, yes. But whether with truth or deception, that remains to be seen. He slipped the letters back carefully. One must never rush to conclusions. Remember, Hastings, the murderer is often one who profits by our haste. As they replaced the papers, a maid from Ashcombe House arrived, breathless, sent to fetch news. She curtsied and delivered a message from Mrs. Clara Frobisher, the widow. She wished to speak with the authorities at once. Ashcombe House was a gracious, ivy-clad residence with wide lawns descending to a small lake. Its windows gleamed, though the atmosphere within was heavy with tension. Mrs. Frobisher received them in a drawing-room filled with chintz and fading roses. She was a woman of striking presence, her auburn hair arranged with care, though her eyes were shadowed and her voice low. She accepted Poirot's condolences with composure that struck Hastings as oddly measured. "My husband and I," she said quietly, "had been estranged for some time. He lived here only occasionally, his business kept him in town. But I never wished him ill. Whatever faults he had, and they were many, I did not desire his death." Poirot studied her with grave courtesy. "Madam, you were aware of your husband's affairs, both business and personal." A flicker passed over her face. "Affairs? If you mean women, yes. If you mean finance, less so. He was not a man to share confidences." Hastings, perhaps unwisely, blurted, "Did you quarrel recently?" Her lips pressed together. "We quarrelled often, Captain Hastings. But never beyond words." Poirot intervened smoothly. "And last evening, where were you, madam?" "At home," she replied without hesitation. "I dined alone at 7:30. The servants will confirm it." Poirot inclined his head. "Très bien. We shall not detain you longer." As they departed, Hastings whispered, "What do you think?" She seemed rather cool for a widow. Poirot raised a finger. "Do not be deceived by appearances, Hastings. Some hearts conceal grief behind composure. Others conceal calculation. Which is Madame Frobisher? That we must discover." Back at the inn, Constable Riggs reported further intelligence. Frobisher's business partner, Lionel Graves, had arrived in the village demanding news. He claimed to have been in London yesterday, but the constable noted his agitation. And Miss Violet Turner, once secretary to Frobisher, had been dismissed under mysterious circumstances only a week earlier. Poirot listened attentively, his eyes half closed. 3 names, Hastings. A wife, an associate, a dismissed secretary. Each with reason, perhaps, to resent. But resentment alone is not murder. We must dig deeper, into the psychology, the little details. Hastings sighed. "Always psychology with you, Poirot." Poirot smiled, his moustaches bristling proudly. "But of course. To understand the crime, one must first understand the heart. It is not the weapon that interests Poirot, it is the motive, the tiny flame that burns within. When I know that, Hastings, I shall know all." That night, Poirot sat by the inn's fire, his small form immaculate in contrast to the rustic setting. He drew his notebook from his pocket and wrote carefully, in neat columns. Facts. Victim, Henry Frobisher, banker. Time of death, between 6 and 7 p.m. Blow to skull, precise and deliberate. Coat folded beside body. Shoes immaculate despite muddy verge. Wallet, watch, valuables untouched. Ink stains in motor car. Smear of blood not victim's own. Letters from unknown lady. He paused, tapping his pencil against his lips. Then he added another heading. Questions. Why was Frobisher on that lonely road? Who awaited him there? Was the scene arranged to mislead? Whose blood is it on the trousers? And most curious of all, who wrote the letters? He closed the notebook with a snap, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. The stage is set, Hastings, he said softly, though his companion had already retired to bed. The actors take their places. Soon, the drama will unfold. An Hercule Poirot, he shall be ready. Chapter 3, A Gallery of Suspects. The parlour of the village inn had become, for the time being, a chamber of interrogation. The innkeeper, though nervous about the disruption, had provided tea and a fire, and Poirot, ever fastidious, arranged his chair so that the light fell favourably upon his subject while he himself remained half in shadow. It was, as Hastings reflected with some amusement, less a police inquiry and more a performance, and Poirot its director. The first to be summoned was Mrs. Clara Frobisher, the widow. She entered with measured tread, her chin lifted, her dark gown cut with sober elegance. A faint perfume lingered about her, subtle but deliberate. "Madam," Poirot began with gentle courtesy, "we intrude upon you in a moment of sorrow. Yet it is necessary. You will forgive us." Her voice was low and composed. "I understand, Monsieur Poirot. You must do your duty." Poirot inclined his head. "It is most correct. Now, your husband. You lived, I am told, apart." She folded her hands. "Yes. Henry and I had long ceased to be companions in anything but name. He was devoted to his business." And she paused, a shadow crossing her features. "There were other interests that claimed him." "You speak of women?" Poirot prompted delicately. She gave a small, weary smile. "I learned long ago not to inquire too closely. But I assure you, monsieur, I had no wish for his death. Estranged though we were, his position secured my own. I stood to gain nothing by such an act." Hastings, ever literal, interjected, "On the contrary, madam, don't you inherit his estate?" Her eyes flicked toward him, calm but cold. "Yes, Captain Hastings. But inheritance is no motive for murder when one already enjoys the comforts of wealth. I had all I required." Poirot's gaze rested on her face, unreadable. "And last night, madam?" She replied steadily, "I dined alone. The servants will tell you so." Poirot made a small note in his pocket book. "Merci, madam. You may go." As she left, Hastings muttered, "She's cool as a cucumber. Almost too cool." Poirot pursed his lips. "Perhaps. But remember, Hastings, grief does not wear the same costume for all." The next visitor was Mr. Lionel Graves, tall and broad-shouldered, with a brisk manner and eyes that darted restlessly about the room. His handshake was firm but damp, his expression that of a man deeply inconvenienced. "Perfect nuisance, this business," he declared at once. "Poor Frobisher dead, of course, but really, I've a firm to run. Clients to reassure. And now police and detectives descending upon me like a flock of crows." Poirot regarded him serenely. "You and Monsieur Frobisher were partners?" "For 15 years, Graves replied. "We built the business together. Reliable investments, steady growth. At least until recently." His mouth tightened. Henry was becoming speculative. "Risky." "I told him so." "Risky in what way?" Hastings asked. "Foreign ventures, dubious loans." He was dazzled by quick returns. "I warned him, we had obligations, reputations to maintain. We quarreled bitterly about it." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Ah, you quarreled. And when was the last of these disputes?" "Only last week," Graves admitted, with a shrug that aimed for nonchalance but failed. "But quarrels are nothing in business. We were partners, not enemies." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "And yesterday evening, monsieur? Where were you?" "In London," Graves replied swiftly. "I had a meeting at 7 o'clock. I dined afterward at my club. Plenty of people saw me. You may check." Poirot's gaze lingered on him, then dropped to the man's hands, well kept, with ink stains about the fingers. Poirot noted them without comment. "Merci, monsieur. That will suffice." As Graves departed, Hastings murmured, "Not the most likable chap, eh?" And he admitted to quarrelling with Frobisher. Poirot twirled a moustache end thoughtfully. Oh, He quarrelled, certainly. But to quarrel is not to kill. Let us hear the next. Last came Miss Violet Turner, slender and pale, her eyes downcast as though seeking refuge in the pattern of the carpet. She wore a modest dress, though neatly pressed, and her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them together. Poirot's voice softened. Mademoiselle Turner, you were employed by Monsieur Frobisher. Yes, she said in a quiet tone. For 3 years. I was his secretary. And yet last week, you were dismissed. Her throat worked. Yes. He said I had made errors. But that is not true. I believe, her voice faltered. I believe he wished to discredit me. He accused me of theft, of negligence. None of it was fair. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And you resented this treatment, naturellement. Tears welled in her eyes. I had no other position to go to. My reputation is ruined. How could I not resent it? But I could not, commit murder. Hastings leaned forward kindly. Tell us where you were last evening, Miss Turner. She hesitated. At home. Alone. There is no one who can confirm it. Poirot regarded her steadily. His eyes drifted to a faint mark upon her sleeve, an ink stain, dried but distinct. You worked often with ink, mademoiselle. Yes, she admitted quickly. I was copying accounts only yesterday. Perhaps that is what you see. Perhaps, Poirot murmured, his gaze unreadable. That will be all. When she had gone, Hastings exhaled. Well, Poirot, there you are. 3 suspects, each with motive enough. Poirot raised a finger. Motives apparent, yes. But we must be careful, Hastings. Life is not so obliging as to present us with culprits tied up neatly in ribbon. Observe, my friend, Madame Frobisher, with her cool composure, does it conceal grief or indifference? Monsieur Graves, with his quarrels and his alibi, too quick, too pat? And the demure Miss Turner, resentment hidden behind timidity. He leaned back, his eyes half closed. It is like the stage, Hastings. Each actor presents a part. But what is genuine, and what is artifice? That we must discern. Hastings frowned. I don't like it. Any one of them could have done it. Poirot opened his eyes, bright with amusement. Or none of them, mon ami. That is the beauty of the puzzle. It deceives, it misleads. Already I see the threads crossing. But patience, Hastings. We must collect the small facts, the overlooked trifles. They will lead us, step by step, to the truth. He tapped his notebook thoughtfully, where 3 names were inscribed beneath the word suspects. Beside each he wrote a single phrase. Clara Frobisher, coolness, inheritance. Lionel Graves, quarrels, alibi. Violet Turner, dismissal, ink stain. Poirot closed the book with a snap. The game is afoot, as your Mr. Holmes would say. But Poirot, he plays it in his own way. And as the fire crackled in the hearth, Hastings could not help but feel the first chill of excitement, mingled with unease. Somewhere among these 3 lay the key to Frobisher's death. Or perhaps, as Poirot hinted, the key lay elsewhere altogether, hidden in some small overlooked detail that only the little Belgian could see. Chapter 4 of The First Red Herring. The autumn sun shone weakly through a veil of cloud as Poirot and Hastings set out the next morning to walk the stretch of road where Frobisher's body had been discovered. The mist of the previous evening had lifted, leaving the verges damp and the hedgerows glistening with dew. A faint chill lingered in the air, sharp enough to make Hastings button his coat. Poirot, on the other hand, was immaculate as ever, bowler hat tilted just so, gloves spotless, moustaches gleaming. He stepped with exaggerated care, pausing frequently to observe the ground, the hedges, even the shape of the road itself. "You know, Poirot," Hastings remarked after a time, "I can't help thinking Mrs. Frobisher is the likeliest suspect. She inherits his estate, she admits they quarrelled, and she was only 3 miles away at Ashcombe House. It all fits." "Does it, mon ami?" Poirot arched an eyebrow. "It fits too well, perhaps. The criminal, if intelligent, seeks to arrange a tableau, a picture that points away from himself or herself. But sometimes they arrange a picture that points too directly toward another. That is the danger." Hastings gave a skeptical laugh. "I think you're too suspicious by half." Poirot raised a finger. "Suspicion, Hastings, is the beginning of wisdom." They had reached the precise spot where the crowd had gathered the previous evening. The marks of carriage wheels and boot prints were still visible in the soft earth. Poirot crouched with surprising agility, inspecting each with the eye of a jeweler appraising a diamond. It was Hastings who noticed the fragment first, a shred of green fabric caught upon a thorn of the hedgerow. He plucked it free and held it triumphantly aloft. "Look here, Poirot. A piece of scarf, I should say. And didn't Mrs. Frobisher wear green yesterday?" Poirot accepted the fragment delicately. It was indeed part of a fine woolen scarf, torn unevenly as though caught in haste. He studied it without expression, then slipped it into an envelope. "Exactly as you say, Hastings. It is green, and Madame Frobisher has a scarf of such a colour." Hastings beamed. "Well, there you are then. Proof positive she was here." Poirot gave a faint sigh. "You leap like the grasshopper, Hastings, from one fact to the grand conclusion. But attend, the scarf is torn, yes. But observe the fibres. They are dry. This road was damp last evening, the mist heavy. If the fragment were dropped in the struggle, would it not be damp also?" Hastings frowned, deflated. "You mean it was placed here later? Or earlier? Or by another hand entirely?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "It is a clue, yes. But is it genuine or counterfeit? That we must ask ourselves." Later that afternoon, Inspector Briggs of the County Constabulary arrived to assume control. A stout, good-natured man with a walrus moustache, he was inclined to treat Poirot with a mixture of deference and healthy skepticism. "So you found a piece of scarf, have you?" Briggs said, examining the fragment. "And Mrs. Frobisher owns one just like it?" "Well, that looks plain enough to me." Hastings nodded vigorously. "Exactly my view." Poirot, however, only smiled politely. "Plain, perhaps. But the truth, Inspector, is rarely plain. It hides in shadows, in trifles overlooked. Tell me, do you intend to question Madam again?" "Of course," Briggs replied. "If she can't account for her movements, we'll have to consider her seriously." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "And yet, mon cher Inspector, she has accounted for them. The servants confirm she dined alone at the hour when the crime was committed. True, they cannot swear she did not slip out beforehand, but is it likely she would leave her carriage so near the lane, and tear her scarf for all to see?" Briggs snorted. "Criminals make mistakes." "Oh, Poirot agreed mildly. "But they rarely make mistakes so obliging." That evening, Mrs. Frobisher herself arrived at the inn, summoned by Briggs for further questioning. She swept into the parlour with dignity, though a flicker of annoyance betrayed her feelings at being compelled to appear again. "Inspector, Monsieur Poirot," she said coolly, "what new indignity must I endure?" Briggs held up the fragment. "Can you identify this, madam?" She glanced at it and nodded at once. "Yes. It is from my scarf. I noticed yesterday that it was torn. Where is the scarf now? Briggs asked. At home, in my wardrobe. You may examine it if you wish. Briggs made a note, clearly satisfied. And how, may I ask, did it come to be caught on a hedge near the place where your husband was murdered? Her eyes flashed. I have no idea. Perhaps Henry had it with him. Perhaps he tore it himself. I cannot answer for it. Poirot, who had watched silently, interposed gently. Madam, may I inquire when you last wore the scarf? Yesterday afternoon, she replied. I took a walk on the lawn. I must have caught it on a branch without noticing. Later I changed before dinner and left it in my room. Briggs frowned. And yet here we find a piece of it, on the lane where the body lay. Mrs. Frobisher lifted her chin. Are you suggesting I am a murderess, Inspector? That I lured my husband to that place and struck him down? It is absurd. Poirot rose, bowing slightly. Madam, I suggest nothing. I merely observe. And one observation is clear, the fragment is too neat, too convenient. It tells its tale too loudly. A clue that shouts is often a clue that lies. Mrs. Frobisher looked at him with sudden sharpness. Then you believe I am innocent? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Madam, I believe nothing, yet. I only follow where the little grey cells lead. She studied him a moment longer, then turned and swept out, leaving the room heavy with tension. When she had gone, Hastings turned to Poirot in frustration. You astonish me, Poirot. We find her scarf by the scene, and still you hesitate. If that isn't evidence, I don't know what is. Poirot seated himself again, smoothing his moustache. My dear Hastings, let me ask you a question. If you were Madame Frobisher, clever enough to inherit a fortune by her husband's death, would you leave behind a piece of your own scarf at the scene? A scarf of a colour that all the village has seen you wear? No, mon ami. That is not cleverness, that is folly. But criminals are often foolish, Hastings insisted. Poirot wagged a finger. Perhaps. But here, everything else is arranged with precision. The coat folded, the blow exact, the valuables untouched. That is not the work of folly. No, Hastings, the scarf fragment is a gift. A little present from the murderer, who wishes us to look in the wrong direction. Hastings groaned. Then we're back to the beginning again. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Not at all. We are further along. We know now that our murderer is subtle, artful. He, or she, plants evidence. That, Hastings, is the mark of intelligence. And it is always easier to unmask the clever criminal, for he cannot resist leaving his signature upon the crime. That night, as the village slept, Poirot sat in his chamber, the scarf fragment laid before him like a card in a game of patience. He regarded it thoughtfully, then slipped it back into the envelope. The false clue, he murmured. It is as old as crime itself. But to disguise the false as true, that is art. And yet, even art leaves brushstrokes. Ah, mon meurtrier, you play with Poirot. But take care, you may find the game ends not as you intended. Chapter 5, The Businessman's Shadow. The morning found Poirot unusually brisk. He breakfasted neatly on coffee, rolls, and an egg boiled to his exact specifications, then announced to Hastings that they must travel into town. We go, mon ami, to the offices of Graves and Frobisher, he declared, adjusting his cuffs. If one wishes to know a man, one examines his affairs. Bankers, they do not merely handle money, they handle lives, ambitions, failures. And these things, Hastings, they breed resentments. Hastings, who would have preferred a day of fresh air and country lanes, resigned himself to figures and ledgers. They took the motorcar and soon drew up before a stone-fronted building in the market square, its brass plate polished to a high sheen, Graves and Frobisher, investment bankers. Inside, a clerk ushered them into a panelled office, where Lionel Graves rose from behind a heavy desk. His manner was cordial but uneasy, as though he wished to appear cooperative while resenting the intrusion. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," he greeted. "What can I do for you this time?" "I've already told the inspector all I know." Poirot inclined his head politely. "We do not doubt it, monsieur. But perhaps you will indulge me. I wish to understand your partnership with the late Monsieur Frobisher. 15 years, is it not?" 16, Graves corrected. He sat, gesturing for them to do likewise. "We began modestly, small investments, cautious clients. We built a reputation for soundness. But lately," he hesitated, then shrugged. "Lately, Henry grew reckless. I told you before. He was dazzled by foreign markets, schemes in South America, shipping ventures, that sort of thing. All beyond our usual line. And these ventures, they succeeded?" Poirot asked softly. "Some, yes. Others, less so. There were losses. He concealed them, I suspect, even from me." Poirot's brows rose. Concealed from his partner. Graves' lips tightened. Henry was clever. He could manipulate accounts, shift funds. I warned him it would end badly. And if it ended badly, Poirot murmured, it would reflect upon you also, monsieur. Graves' eyes hardened. Naturally. My name is on the door. There was silence for a moment, broken only by the ticking of a clock. Poirot leaned forward slightly. Tell me, monsieur, on the evening of your partner's death, you were in London, were you not? Yes. I had a meeting at 7, at the Imperial Hotel. Afterwards I dined at my club. Poirot's head tilted. And the meeting, was it with a client? Graves hesitated. Yes. A potential investor. May I have the name? He shifted in his chair. I'd rather not disclose my client's affairs, if you please. Confidentiality. Poirot interrupted with a small, sharp gesture. Monsieur, your partner is dead by violence. In such a case, confidentiality must yield to justice. Graves flushed. Very well. Mr. Edmonds. He lives in Surrey. You may confirm with him if you wish. Poirot inclined his head. Merci. After leaving the office, Hastings voiced his doubts. Well, Poirot, Graves does look a bit shaky. And if Frobisher had been fiddling the accounts, it would give him every reason to silence him before things came out. He seemed very reluctant to name that client. Poirot twirled a moustache end. Yes, he was reluctant. And yet, Hastings, notice this, if Graves were the murderer, would he not prepare his alibi with greater smoothness? Instead, he hesitates, he flushes, he reveals awkwardly. That is not cunning, it is clumsiness. Clumsiness can hang a man, Hastings insisted. Or it can be the clumsiness of innocence, Poirot replied serenely. We must not decide too soon. That afternoon, they returned to the inn to find Inspector Briggs waiting with a bundle of papers. Bank records, Briggs explained, laying them out. We've been through Frobisher's personal accounts. Look here, large withdrawals, unexplained, in the past month. Poirot bent over the figures. His eyes sharpened. OUI. Large sums indeed. And see, Hastings, the withdrawals are made in cash, not cheque. That is secrecy. A man does not withdraw such sums unless he wishes no trace to remain. Hastings frowned. Could it be blackmail? Poirot's eyes gleamed. It could, mon ami. It could. And who is the blackmailer? That is the question. Briggs added gruffly, we also found this among his desk papers. He produced a crumpled note, scrawled in a bold hand, you will meet me on the Ashcombe Road at 6. Do not fail me, or the truth will out. Hastings exclaimed, by Jove, that settles it. Someone lured him there. Blackmail without a doubt. Poirot's expression remained calm, though his moustaches twitched. Yes, someone lured him there. But notice, Hastings, the note is unsigned. And the handwriting, very bold, very clear. Too clear, perhaps. As though it were written for the stage, not for the confessional. You mean, it was a trap? Precisely. Poirot tapped the paper with a finger. And who benefits from Monsieur Frobisher's silence? His wife? His partner? His secretary? All three could have motive. But which of them possesses the psychology to play such a game? Later, they paid another visit to Lionel Graves at his townhouse. Poirot asked casually if he recognized the note. Graves scanned it, then shook his head. No. But Henry was always getting entangled in dubious affairs. Wouldn't surprise me if someone had him by the throat. Poirot regarded him closely. And yet, monsieur, if you knew he was reckless, why remain his partner? Graves spread his hands helplessly. Because the firm was everything I'd built. Because I hoped to restrain him. Because, he broke off, visibly agitated. Poirot's gaze lingered, but he said only, merci, monsieur. That evening, in their rooms at the inn, Hastings paced in frustration. It all points to Graves. He quarrelled with Frobisher, he had everything to lose if shady dealings were exposed, and now there's this note. Why won't you admit it, Poirot? Poirot smiled indulgently. Because, mon cher Hastings, the truth is not yet ripe. Consider, the note is too theatrical, the scarf fragment too convenient. One clue points to Madame Frobisher, another to Monsieur Graves. Each shouts loudly, too loudly. Do you not see? Our murderer is an artist who paints in broad strokes to dazzle the eye. Hastings groaned. Then where does that leave us? With psychology, Hastings. Always psychology. Madame Frobisher, cold, detached. Monsieur Graves, agitated, defensive. Mademoiselle Turner, timid, resentful. Which of these masks conceals the fire of murder? Poirot tapped his temple. It is not in the accounts, nor in the alibis, that the answer lies. It is in the mind. And Hercule Poirot, he will uncover it. That night, long after Hastings had fallen asleep, Poirot sat by the lamplight, the note before him, the bank records at his elbow. He studied them with the same precision with which he arranged his moustache each morning. The truth will out, he murmured, repeating the words of the note. Yes, mon ami inconnu, it will. But not as you intended. Not as you intended at all. Chapter 6 At the Secretary's Secret. The following morning dawned grey and restless, the wind stirring the trees outside the inn with a restless whisper, as though nature itself conspired to unsettle the little village. Poirot, however, was serene. He breakfasted with his customary precision, ensuring his toast was evenly buttered and his egg peeled without blemish. Hastings watched him with impatience. For heaven's sake, Poirot, do stop fussing with your breakfast, he burst out. There's a murderer loose, and you're arranging your toast as if it were a work of art. Poirot looked up, unperturbed. Mon ami, murder is an untidy thing. To combat it, one must bring order, symmetry, the methodical. The stomach, it must not be disturbed by chaos when the little grey cells are required to perform at their best. Hastings muttered something uncomplimentary, but Poirot only smiled. That morning they had arranged to call upon Violet Turner, the secretary to the late Henry Frobisher. She had agreed reluctantly, and when she opened the door to her modest cottage, she looked pale and strained. Her eyes darted nervously as though expecting some accusation to fall upon her at any moment. "Please, Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," she said softly, ushering them into a small parlour. "I don't know what more I can tell you. I've already answered the inspector's questions." Poirot bowed slightly. "Mademoiselle, it is not more facts I seek, but clarity. The truth, it hides like a timid mouse. We must coax it out, not chase it with a broom. Be seated, if you please." She obeyed, clasping her hands tightly in her lap. Hastings, watching, thought how different she was from Clara Frobisher with her icy poise, or from Lionel Graves with his restless energy. Violet Turner seemed fragile, yet there was an undercurrent of determination in her quietness, as if she had endured much. "Mademoiselle," Poirot began gently, "you were devoted to your work, were you not?" "Yes. Mr. Frobisher relied upon me greatly." "Too greatly, perhaps." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Did he ever ask you to, how shall I say, assist him in ways not strictly professional?" A flush rose to her cheeks. "No. I mean, well, he sometimes confided in me. About his worries. His quarrels. He was a difficult man, but I pitied him." "And did Madame Frobisher not resent this confidence?" She looked startled. I don't think so. She scarcely noticed me. She was always distant, absorbed in her own affairs." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Yet you, mademoiselle, noticed her. You knew her moods, her disdain. Did it wound you, perhaps, to see her so cold when you—" Violet drew a sharp breath. "If you are suggesting I was in love with Mr. Frobisher, you are wrong. I respected him, yes, but I had no illusions. He could be harsh, even cruel. Still, he depended on me. Without me the business would have fallen to pieces." Poirot observed her keenly. "Dependence is a powerful chain, mademoiselle. It binds the one who leans, but also the one who is leaned upon. Sometimes, such a chain becomes a burden. Did you ever wish to break it?" She looked down, her hands twisting. "Perhaps. There were times when I felt trapped. He sometimes asked me to prepare letters or statements that were not entirely truthful. Alterations to figures, small deceptions. I hated it, but I obeyed. I feared losing my position." Hastings exclaimed, "By Jove! Then you did know of the financial irregularities." Violet flinched. Poirot raised a calming hand. "Gently, Hastings. Mademoiselle, you say you feared losing your position. Why? Was there more at stake than employment?" For a long moment she hesitated. At last she whispered, "My brother. He is not well. He requires constant care, medicines. My wages paid for that. Without them, he would suffer." Poirot's eyes softened. "Ah. You sacrificed your conscience for love of family. That, mademoiselle, is no crime. But did Monsieur Frobisher ever use this knowledge to bind you tighter still?" Tears glistened in her eyes. "Yes. He knew my situation. He knew I would not betray him. And sometimes he hinted that if I did not do as he wished, he might dismiss me. I bore it, for my brother's sake." Poirot sat back, fingers steepled. "Très intéressant. You had both motive and opportunity to resent Monsieur Frobisher deeply. Tell me, mademoiselle, on the evening of his death, where were you?" Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. "Here. At home. Alone." A dangerous alibi, Poirot said softly. She looked stricken. Do you mean you think I killed him? Poirot spread his hands. I think nothing. I observe. You had knowledge of his secrets, you had cause to fear exposure, and you had no witness to your evening. These are facts. But facts are not truth. As they left the cottage, Hastings could contain himself no longer. Well, Poirot, I don't mind saying that looks dashed suspicious. She admits to cooking the books, she has a sick brother to protect, and she can't prove where she was. It fits. Poirot walked thoughtfully, tapping his cane against the pavement. It fits, Hastings, yes. But does it fit too well? Again, we find a portrait painted in bold strokes. The poor secretary, bound by circumstance, driven to desperation. It is a picture designed to appeal to the emotions, to arouse sympathy and suspicion in equal measure. Hastings frowned. But surely she wouldn't have admitted so much if she were guilty. Perhaps. Or perhaps she confesses a small crime to hide a larger one. That, too, is possible. Yet, mon ami, my instinct says otherwise. I saw her tears, her shame. That was genuine. She suffers, yes, but not, I think, from guilt of murder. That afternoon, Inspector Briggs arrived with new information. We've searched Frobisher's study more thoroughly, he reported. Came across this. He produced a half-burned letter, rescued from the grate. The writing was smudged but legible. If you continue to use the girl, you will regret it. She deserves better. I will not stand by. Hastings whistled. The girl, that must mean Violet. And someone threatening Frobisher over her. Perhaps she had a protector, who struck him down in anger. Poirot studied the charred paper, eyes glittering. Or perhaps, he murmured, Monsieur Frobisher burned this because it struck too close to the truth. Yes, this letter is of great importance. It tells us that others noticed his treatment of Mademoiselle Turner. And it tells us, also, that passion is involved. Passion, Hastings, the strongest of motives. Then who wrote it? Hastings asked. That, Poirot said softly, we must discover. And when we do, I think we shall step closer to the heart of the matter. That night, Poirot sat by the fire, reflecting. He recalled Violet Turner's trembling hands, her shame, her devotion to her brother. He recalled also the bold handwriting of the burned letter, echoing the bold strokes of the note that had summoned Frobisher to his death. Two bold hands. One perhaps authentic, one perhaps forged. Or, perhaps the same hand, weaving a pattern of deception. Poirot smiled faintly. The artist grows careless, he murmured. Brushstrokes too broad, colors too vivid. Soon, the picture will betray itself. Ah, mon meurtrier, I see the outline of your design. The little grey cells, they begin to arrange the puzzle. Chapter 7, Gathering Shadows. By the end of the week, the village was buzzing like a disturbed hive. Rumours ran from doorstep to doorstep. Clara Frobisher had been overheard quarrelling with her husband, Lionel Graves had cooked the firm's accounts, Violet Turner had been threatened and exploited. Everyone had a story, but no one had the truth. Poirot, however, walked serenely among the whispering villagers, his cane tapping lightly on the cobbles, his moustaches gleaming. Hastings noticed how people turned to stare at him as if he carried the very solution in his pocket. You look insufferably smug, Poirot, Hastings complained one morning. Have you already sold the thing and kept it from me? Poirot smiled indulgently. Patience, mon ami. The truth, it ripened slowly, like a fine pear. Pluck it too soon, and it is sour. Pluck it at the right moment, and it is perfection. Hastings muttered that pears were all very well, but murderers were another matter. That afternoon Poirot requested Inspector Briggs to assemble the principal figures in the case at the inn's parlour. Briggs grumbled that it was irregular, but Poirot had a way of bending people to his will, and soon, as the lamps were lit, 3 uneasy individuals sat in stiff chairs opposite the fire. Clara Frobisher looked icily composed, her dark gown severe, her chin lifted in defiance. Lionel Graves shifted uneasily, his restless hands betraying his agitation despite his attempt at composure. Violet Turner sat pale and withdrawn, her eyes downcast, as though bracing herself for fresh humiliation. Poirot and Hastings took their places by the hearth, while Briggs loomed in the background like a watchful bulldog. "Mesdames, Messrs," Poirot began with courtly calm, "we meet tonight not to accuse, but to observe. Already I see many facts, but they are like the pieces of a jigsaw scattered upon the table. Each must be fitted to its neighbour, each must find its place. Only then does the picture reveal itself." The 3 suspects shifted uneasily. Poirot let the silence stretch, then added, "I have learned of financial irregularities. I have learned of domestic unhappiness. I have learned of secrets and threats. Each of you had cause, perhaps, to wish Henry Frobisher dead." Clara Frobisher's lips curved in a cold smile. "Cause, perhaps. But not courage. I am not a woman who dirties her hands." Graves gave a harsh laugh. "And yet you stood to gain everything from his death." Her eyes flashed. "And you, Mr. Graves, would have lost everything if Henry's schemes had been exposed." Violet Turner stirred, speaking unexpectedly. "You both quarrelled with him. I only tried to help him. And still, I am made to feel guilty." Poirot lifted a hand, silencing the rising discord. "Patience, Miss Amos. We shall not resolve matters by bickering. Instead, let us speak of trifles, of times, of objects, of words. For it is in the trifles that the truth resides." He turned first to Clara Frobisher. "Madam, you possess a green scarf, from which a fragment was found upon the lane." Her expression did not change. "I have told you, it tore upon a branch in my garden. How it came to be elsewhere, I cannot say." Poirot inclined his head. "Yes. And yet it was found dry upon a wet night. Curious, n'est-ce pas?" For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. Poirot turned next to Graves. "Monsieur, you were in London at the hour of the crime. You dined at your club. And yet, your reluctance to name your client, it casts a shadow. Why so hesitant, if all is innocent?" Graves bristled. "Because business dealings are private. I thought that obvious." Poirot regarded him keenly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps you feared that Monsieur Edmonds might say you never met him at all." Graves paled, but said nothing. Lastly Poirot addressed Violet Turner. "Mademoiselle, you confess you altered figures at Monsieur Frobisher's request. You feared dismissal, you feared for your brother. Such fear, could it drive you to desperate action?" Her voice trembled. "No, monsieur. Whatever I suffered, I could never," she broke off, pressing a hand to her mouth. Poirot let the silence hang, then said gently, "There was also the letter, half burned. A letter defending you, written in bold strokes. If you continue to use the girl, you will regret it. She deserves better. I will not stand by. Tell me, do you know the hand?" Violet's eyes widened. "No. I cannot say." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Can you not, or will you not?" She looked down, stricken. Hastings, who had been following with mounting excitement, could no longer restrain himself. "Poirot, you've trapped her. She knows more than she admits. I'd wager she was involved with some admirer who killed Frobisher for her sake." Poirot gave him a glance of gentle reproof. "Always you gallop, Hastings, like the cavalry. But remember, appearances deceive. The admirer, yes, that possibility exists. But admiration, it may also be pretended. To frame the innocent, one has only to write a letter in their defense. Hastings flushed but said no more. Poirot rose, surveying the room with grave dignity. Miss Amiss, I have planted my seeds. Already they grow. Soon, the harvest will come. But for now, I make only this request, that none of you leave the village. The truth, it draws near, and when it comes, it will touch each of you. Clara Frobisher rose at once. This is intolerable. I am not a prisoner. Poirot bowed slightly. Nor shall you be, madam. But I assure you, if you depart, you will invite suspicion. She hesitated, then swept from the room without another word. Graves muttered something under his breath and stalked out after her. Violet lingered a moment, pale and uncertain. Monsieur Poirot, do you truly believe I am guilty? Poirot's gaze softened. Mademoiselle, I believe only in the little grey cells. And they tell me, courage. For soon, the shadow will lift. She gave him a trembling smile and departed. When the room was empty, Hastings turned to Poirot. Well, you didn't reveal much. What was the point of all that, if you're still withholding the truth? Poirot seated himself once more, folding his hands. Mon ami, sometimes one must apply the flame to the wax and see how it melts. Each of them revealed something tonight, not in words, but in gestures, in silence, in anger. Madame Frobisher's mask slipped for an instant. Graves turned pale when I named his client. And Mademoiselle Turner, her trembling betrayed a secret not yet spoken. Hastings sighed. But where does it lead us? Poirot smiled faintly. To the finale, Hastings. To the denouement. One more step, and the pattern will be clear. But that step, it must be taken carefully, with order, with precision. For in this case, the murderer has woven a tapestry of deception. One thread pulled wrongly, and the picture collapses. But pull the right thread, and he snapped his fingers lightly. Voila! The truth is revealed. That night, as Hastings retired, Poirot remained by the fire, his eyes half closed. The scarf, the letter, the note summoning Frobisher, all too perfect, too theatrical. He smiled to himself. Yes, mon ami meurtrier, he murmured softly. You play with bold colours, with grand gestures. But Poirot, he sees the small strokes, the hidden pattern. And tomorrow, the game ends. Chapter 8, The Final Gathering. The parlour of the Ashcombe Arms had never seen such an assembly. Inspector Briggs stood grimly by the door, his notebook at the ready. Clara Frobisher sat rigid, her gloved hands resting on her lap like carved ivory. Lionel Graves shifted restlessly, his eyes darting to the window as though longing to escape. Violet Turner looked pale, her hands twisting together until the knuckles blanched. Hastings, seated close by, was all excitement and impatience. At the centre of them all, composed as ever, stood Hercule Poirot. He had taken care with his attire, dark suit immaculate, shoes gleaming, moustaches curled to perfection. He looked not merely a detective, but a maestro poised to conduct his orchestra. Mesdames, messieurs, he began softly, the hour has come. Tonight, we conclude our little drama. You have all, in your way, played parts upon this stage. But the play is nearly finished, and the truth must speak. A silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Poirot let it linger, then began. First, we must consider the scene of the crime. Henry Frobisher lay upon the roadside, his coat neatly folded beside him. At once we see order, deliberation. Not the work of a hot-tempered quarrel, but of a mind that arranges. He turned to Clara. Madam, suspicion fell swiftly upon you. You stood to inherit, and the fragment of your scarf was found by the hedge. Too convenient, non? It was meant to shout your guilt. But when a clue shouts, one must ask, who placed it there? For it was dry on a damp night. Someone tore your scarf earlier, or later, and left it where it would condemn you. You are not the murderer. Clara's lips curved in a faint, bitter smile. Poirot continued. Then we looked to Monsieur Graves. His business suffered from Frobisher's recklessness. He was uneasy, reluctant to name his alibi. Again, suspicion pointed his way. Yet consider, would he, so clumsy in manner, be so artful in murder? None. He hides things, yes, but from embarrassment, not guilt. He, too, is innocent of the killing. Graves let out a long breath, though his eye still flickered nervously. Poirot's gaze shifted to Violet Turner. Ah, mademoiselle. You admitted to altering figures at your employer's command. You confessed your fear for your brother's welfare. Alone that evening, with no witness, such circumstances place you in peril. And the half-burned letter spoke of you. If you continue to use the girl, you will regret it. A letter written in bold strokes, the same bold hand as the note that summoned Frobisher to his death. Too neat again, too perfect. It was meant to embroil you in a tale of passion. But the truth, non, it is not yours to bear. You are not the murderer. Violet's eyes filled with sudden tears. Hastings gave a startled exclamation. But, Poirot, if it wasn't any of them, then who? Poirot raised a finger. Patience, mon ami. We come now to the heart. He drew from his pocket 2 papers, the crumpled note found in Frobisher's desk and the charred fragment of the letter defending Violet. He held them side by side. Observe the handwriting. Both bold, deliberate, formed as though for show. Both seek to mislead, one luring Frobisher to the lane, the other painting a picture of a protector for Mademoiselle Turner. 2 notes, 1 hand. But whose hand? He allowed the question to hang, his gaze sweeping across the room. The answer lies in psychology. Who among you delights in bold gestures, in theatrical flourishes? Who planted the scarf fragment, staged the scene, wrote the notes? Not the cold madam, who disdains display. Not the anxious Graves, whose clumsiness betrays him. Not the timid secretary, who trembles even at confession. No, the murderer is one who revels in performance. His eyes gleamed. It was you, Inspector Briggs. A collective gasp filled the room. Hastings leapt to his feet. Good heavens, Poirot, Briggs. The inspector's ruddy face turned ashen. That's preposterous, he barked. I've led this inquiry from the start. Precisely, said Poirot softly. You arrived with convenient evidence, the bank records, the burned letter. Too easily found, n'est-ce pas? You guided suspicion first to Madame Frobisher, then to Graves, then to Mademoiselle Turner. Always you produced a clue at the opportune moment. But you overlooked one thing, the psychology of order. The neat coat, the planted scarf, the staged notes, all other work of a man who craves control, who delights in arranging. That, Inspector, is your nature. Briggs spluttered, you've no proof. Ah, but I have. Poirot raised the 2 notes again. These papers, when examined, they revealed traces of official stationery, faint impressions on the fibres. The charred letter was begun on county constabulary paper. Only one man here has access to that, yourself. The room erupted in shocked exclamations. Briggs made a sudden lunge toward the door, but Graves and Hastings seized him. He struggled a moment, then sagged, defeated. When the uproar had subsided, Poirot explained calmly. The motive was simple. Monsieur Frobisher discovered certain irregularities, not only in his own business, but in the accounts of the county constabulary. Inspector Briggs had misappropriated funds, small sums at first, later greater. Frobisher threatened to expose him. Thus the note, "The truth will out." He arranged to meet Briggs upon the lane. But it was Briggs who struck the fatal blow, folded the coat, planted the scarf, forged the letters. He sought to entangle others and direct suspicion away from himself. Clara Frobisher whispered, "Then Henry's death was not for my inheritance, not for business quarrels, not for Violet's suffering, but for corruption." Poirot bowed his head. "Alas, madam! The motives of murder are often base, not grand. But the artistry, that was grand." Inspector Briggs believed himself a master. But he forgot, there is always one artist greater, the truth. Later, when Briggs had been led away under guard, Hastings turned to Poirot, still reeling. "Upon my word, Poirot, I'd never have suspected him. I was certain it was Clara, or Graves, or Violet. You let us chase every possible shadow." Poirot smiled benignly. "It was necessary, mon ami. The murderer painted a picture of shadows. To see the figure behind them, one must follow each shade to its end. And in the end, what remains? Only the truth." He adjusted his moustache with satisfaction. "It is always the same. Murderers believe themselves clever. They plant clues, they arrange scenes, they forge letters. But they forget the little grey cells, they cannot be deceived. They seek order, and order they find." Hastings shook his head in admiration. "Well, Poirot, you've done it again. By Jove, what a case!" Poirot allowed himself a small, triumphant smile. "Oh, mon ami. Another case, another truth revealed. And now, perhaps, we may dine. For Hercule Poirot has solved the crime, and Hercule Poirot is hungry."